Well, here at the Aussie Wire, we've been keeping a close eye on what's been happening in London with these ultra-low emissions zones. People aren't very happy, and that's putting it mildly. Now, I predicted it late last year that this year would be the year when people began to really push back, when the pushback really began in earnest. Now, I was talking about things being organised at a sort of a high level, groups coming together, getting organised, pushing back legally and pushing back in different ways. But it turns out, I was maybe perhaps a little bit more right than I realised, because what's begun to happen in the last few weeks on the streets of London is quite extraordinary. And joining me now to update you and to tell us all about it is a correspondent, Joanne Nova. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Topher. It is fascinating what's going on in London, and it looks like it's finally biting in a really bad way. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has decided that he will expand what was an inner London charge for cars that did not fit his emissions desirable requirements. That are now going to have to pay £12.50 a day. And for Australians, that translates to about $25 a day to be able to drive in most of Greater London now. So it's an extraordinary fee, and it's hitting poorer zones, of course, as it expands into the suburbs and the outer boroughs of London. And for a charge like that, and I think a lot of them are just waking up to the fact that it's coming very quickly. This expansion, and they've been caught off guard, and people are just starting to realise how bad this is going to be. Sadiq Khan has installed, I think, nearly 2,000 cameras, but people are protesting by vandalising, destroying these cameras, which are going to record number plates and then send them a bill for their $12.50 trip. And spontaneously, groups have organised maps of London so that others can find out where these cameras are. Of course, not to disobey the law, but to find a path to get where they're going and to change their trips accordingly to avoid the Ulez area, is what they're all saying, of course.
Well, this here, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this here, I believe, is a map showing places where people have actually vandalised the cameras and have tried to actually render them ineffective. It's gotten to that point incredibly quickly, where people are literally engaging in active vandalism as an act of civil disobedience.
And this scheme shifted to the outer boroughs on Tuesday this week. So it went live then. And the map you're looking at was from about a week ago. And at that point, I think nearly 30% of all the cameras had been listed as destroyed or damaged, according to, these are spontaneous groups and websites that are coming up just to let people know what the current situation is. So, of course, traffic will presumably drive people who are desperate, will do their best to drive in areas to avoid the cameras. And to put this in perspective, I think if someone gets caught going through a ULEZ zone, it's not just a £12.50 fee, but if they do it without registering, or there's some fine involved, which is more like £170 or £180. And the number of people coming out today, apparently the Traffic for London, Transport for London website crashed because people are looking up to try and see whether their car is included in the scheme.
Sure.
And just so people understand, I believe it's diesel cars older than 2015 are now not able to drive freely through the streets of London, and petrol cars older than 2006 are also caught by this scheme. And so obviously a lot of people in London hadn't really paid attention and weren't really aware of what was going on, because the TfL site has crashed with requests to try and find out from people whether their car got an exemption or not, and whether they could legally drive to work. And people like nurses are pointing out that they're doing night shifts where they've got to drive at 7:30 at night. The buses are obviously not going to be easy for them to catch from these outer boroughs. So they're supposed to pay £12.50 to go to work, and the next morning they're going to be paying £12.50 again to pick it up. Pensioners are saying that their weekly pension is only £186. Now, if you drove every day, 7 times $12.50, we're talking about £80 a week or something. It's an enormous slab of their pension just for the right to drive a car on a road in London. It's an enormous, as I said on my blog, it's a war on the poor, which has now turned into a war on the surveillance cameras.
And I think that this is a point I want to bring out now, is how incredibly regressive this is. It impacts people who can least afford it the most. That's often a feature, though, of these schemes to save the world. The rich are always exempt. They always have other ways of getting around these things. It strikes me first and foremost, and again, thanks to your fantastic journalism, put up a graph here that shows car ownership. Now, this graph needs a little bit of explaining, and I'll get you to do that, please, Joe. Help us to, what are we looking at here, and how does this demonstrate just how regressive this policy is and how harmful it is for poorer people?
Well, one of Sadiq Khan's arguments was that, well, this won't affect people in outer boroughs because most of their cars are compliant and a lot of them don't have cars. They're already catching public transport. But of course, that isn't the case because public transport is notoriously unreliable or bad in these outer zones or slow. And so what we find, the actual data, if you look at this graph, it's broken into three categories: the central London, then it's the inner London, and then the right-hand side is the outer London.
Sure.
So that's the poor suburbs. And then it's divided up into 10 groups of the most deprived on the left. So the poorest of the poor are the most deprived, and blue is the line for people who do not have a car. But you can see even in the most deprived outer areas, we're talking 40% don't have a car, but 60% do have a car. And the cars they have are not going to be new EVs, and they're not going to be 5-year-old diesels or 15-year-old necessarily petrol cars. So a lot of these people are the poorest of the poor, are being hit really hard with this law. Whereas in the inner city, we can see that 75% of people in inner London don't own a car. There are huge blue stripes there because, of course, they can walk places, they can catch buses, and so they're all very close to work and whatnot. So this is actually going to punish the poor, and they are just realising that now, and this is why the protests are becoming so serious, and people are wandering the streets of London now wearing full black balaclavas. They call themselves the Blade Runners, and they're using long garden, the kind of long tools you use to cut your palm trees that have the really long reach with the clippers on the end. And they're using them to snip the wires under these cameras, which stops them working, or they're buying spray paint, as Katie Hopkins mentioned, buying spray paint in order to spray the cameras to stop them recording the number plates of cars in these areas.
We'll get to Katie Hopkins.
And I found a video there. Did you want to play that?
We'll get to Katie Hopkins in just a sec.
Katie Hopkins.
Yeah, we'll get to Katie Hopkins in just a sec. I wanted to draw attention to this because this is a genuinely spontaneous movement. This is people standing up of their own free will, coordinating amongst themselves because of the anger, because of the outrage at how their rights are being trampled on, is how I would describe it myself. But they're not alone, because here's a Daily Mail article here. Sir Ian Duncan Smith backs the Blade Runners, as you've correctly identified them, the ULEZ, the Ultra Low Emissions Zone vandals. He says he's happy for residents of his East London constituency to destroy the cameras because they have been lied to. So this is a genuine grassroots movement, but they're getting support not only amongst journalists, but also amongst some politicians. Now, the Katie Hopkins thing that you mentioned, well, I think I'm just going to play it and let people make up their own minds about what's really going on here. Watch.
Disgusting. You know what these disgusting people are doing? It's vandalism. That's what it is. Vandalism. They are getting filling foam from places like Tool Station, 669, and they are vandalising the cameras that the Mayor of London is trying to put up in order to police the ULEZ zone, the ultra low emission zone that he's planning to expand to, well, pretty much anywhere near the back arse end of London and beyond. People are vandalising his cameras. Certain places, every single camera that's been put up has been sprayed with this filling foam. 669 Tool Station. And I think it's abhorrent. You know, just...
It's a very clever bit of satire. Quite clearly, she is trying to gently encourage people, at least make them aware of where they can get this from. What does this say, Joe? Because I don't believe I've seen this on this scale in an English-speaking Western country in my lifetime. I don't believe I've seen a precedent for this before. What does this mean? What does this represent?
It is extraordinary, isn't it? And people wandering the streets in black balaclavas to hide themselves. And they're not just attacking the cameras used to record the number plates. Apparently now they're also going after the CCTV, which is catching photos of people
Sure.
vandalising these cameras. And the residents appear to be grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And the Daily Mail was reporting just yesterday that the residents were coming out cheering on the people, and they were watching them do this vandalism, and no one was standing up and saying, don't destroy that and don't paint that. When they survey people in London, I think it's only about a quarter who support the new ULEZ zone or want this to be expanded. And people are getting really angry. And they're not just angry at Sadiq Khan, they're angry at Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition. They're angry at the Tories, and they're saying the PM could do something about this, and the PM should be doing something about this, and he should be stopping it. And people are saying that about the Labor Party as well. And it is extraordinary that even Labor Party heavyweights and Keir Starmer have said, Sadiq, maybe think twice about this, maybe just back off or slow down a little. So Sadiq's going even a bit fast for the Labor Party members of the nation, and yet they're not outright stopping it. They're not pointing out what an enormous tax this is. And the extraordinary position they're in, apparently they've said heritage cars are exempt. So 40-year-old cars are now exempt. So now the market has risen for old Morris Minors and minis and cars from, way back. I put up, what do they call it, an imp, one of these cars. It was, they've become worth more because people can buy these old cars and drive them around and not have to pay $12.50 a day in order to get around in London. So, Sadiq Khan may have accidentally created the new mecca for old cars in the world. If you've got a really old car, sell it in London, because it'll become like Cuba, where old cars drive everywhere.
I got to tell you, this is music to my ears, because what you're telling me is that I can finally buy and drive a Series 1 Mazda RX-7, and instead of costing me a fortune because of the repairs and the fuel consumption and the oil consumption and all the other issues that they are known to have, it's actually going to save me money, because it's going to save me $25 a day just on that single charge. This is the best news I've heard all day, Joe. It's kind of hilarious. It's kind of scary. I'm a big believer in civil disobedience. I practice that in Melbourne. I'm still up on criminal charges for that, and they're probably going to use whatever I say in this episode against me in court when they drag me in. Looks like my court cases are going to drag out till next year. But I believe that civil disobedience is an incredibly important part of the democratic process, and this is what we're seeing at work here. This is not some coordinated campaign from some political force. This is a genuine grassroots movement. We're going to keep an eye on where this goes from here. Joanne Nova, thank you so much for coming once again onto the Aussie Wire.